time when China's relations with the US are on shaky ground. That's after Beijing ordered military vessels and jets to warn off an American warship, which, according to China, violated its territorial waters in the South China Sea. On a broader perspective, RT's Kelly Mopat now has been looking at where things have been going wrong between Beijing and Washington.
Remember the famous chocolate cake that Donald Trump used to woo the Chinese leader?
We had the most beautiful piece of chocolate cake that you've ever seen. President Xi was enjoying it.
That was the first time that Trump and Xi met, with Trump putting on a grand dinner for Xi, which also featured Trump's granddaughter singing a song for Xi in Chinese. Well, that was back in April. Since then, Trump's charm offensive seems to have faltered. Here's how the Chinese Foreign Ministry sees it.
President Xi explicitly pointed out that China-U.S. relations have made great progress in the recent days, but they have also been affected by some negative factors.
A fair few such factors, actually, like the U.S. accusing China of being a top human trafficking offender.
China was downgraded to Tier 3 status in this year's report, in part because it has not taken serious steps to end its own complicity in trafficking.
And Washington's plan to sell $1.4 billion in arms to Taiwan, which China regards as a breakaway province, didn't exactly go down well either.
Taiwan is an inalienable part of China, and the US weapons sale to Taiwan violates international laws as well as the basic forms of international relations. China firmly opposes it.
Another thing that China firmly opposes is the installation of American missiles right on its doorstep.
The deployment of the U.S. THAAD missile defense system in South Korea does serious damage to the strategic security interests of all countries in the region, including China and Russia, and disrupts the regional strategic balance.
Well, it looks like relations between Beijing and Washington won't be seeing any major reset. But how big of a blow is that to China? Right now, China's President Xi is in Moscow.
Both China and Russia would like to demonstrate the common interest in view of their deteriorating relations with the United States. Both understand that the Donald Trump administration presents a serious factor of uncertainty, and they remain very cautious. Demonstration of solidarity between China and Russia is seen to be beneficial on the part of both.
Foreign Minister Faisal al-Maqdad held a press conference in Damascus on Monday to dismiss accusations that the government used sarin gas on the militant-held town of Khan Sheikhoun in April. Maqdad revealed that inspectors from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons refused government invitations to visit the site of the attack or the military airport allegedly linked to it.
3 days ago, we received letters from head of the F.T.W saying they will not be able to reach Khan Sheikhoun and that they don't have clearance. And here they mean from Western countries and the US to visit Al-Shairat airport. I believe the airport will expose the main goals of the US and will reveal that it was not used for storing chemical weapons.
Maqdad described US strikes on the Shuairat airbase in response to alleged chemical attacks as unjustified and called the Trump administration insane. He warned against the consequences of a possible new attack on Syrian government targets. Maqdad said Damascus and its allies would respond to any new aggression. He said the US and Western countries accused the Syrian government of using chemical weapons to justify their ties with terrorists.
How can the United States, Saudi Arabia, Britain, France justify their relationship with these terrorist groups when these terrorist groups use chemical weapons in Syria? They cannot. So they have to support any allegation made by these organizations to protect themselves in the West and to justify their relationship with these organizations.
Maqdad said that terrorists smuggled chemical substances into Syria from Iraq. He said the terrorists even tried to bring them illegally from Turkey, a country Maqdad claimed encourages terrorists to use chemical weapons. He warned Syria's enemies of grave consequences should they launch any further attacks on Syria. Al-Maqdad stressed that the Syrian government does not own any chemical weapon, promising any further attack on the Syrian government under the pretext that it used chemical weapons will not be accepted. Hamad
China to increase sea and air patrols as Trump accused of provoking Beijing. China has accused the U.S. of serious political and military provocation in the South China Sea, after a warship veered towards a disputed island. Military jets were scrambled to the USS F.T.W while Chinese leader Xi Jinping called U.S. President Donald Trump. The nation has vowed to step up patrols by air and sea while Mr. Xi said there are a number of negative factors disrupting relations between the two nations. On Sunday, the USS F.T.W came within 12 nautical miles of Triton Island, which is claimed by China, Taiwan, and Vietnam. Ever since his ascension to the White House, Mr. Trump has refused to steer clear of political tangles in the region. The president even agreed a $1.3 billion arms sale in Taiwan, which is viewed as a renegade province of China. Mr. Trump previously called his Chinese counterpart a good man after they met in April. Mr. Xi reportedly told Trump during the phone call he expects Washington to stick to the One China principle, and refuse to deal with Taiwan as if it were autonomous. He said, Xi Jinping emphasized that, since meetings with the president at Mar-a-Lago, China-US relations have achieved important outcomes. At the same time, bilateral relations have been affected by some negative factors. The relationship between the two is crucial now as North Korea steps up missile tests, but the South China Sea, and Trump's weighing in on it, remains an issue of contention between the pair. China has attempted to keep the role as peacemaker by introducing financial and trade sanctions on North Korea, but Mr. Trump is calling for it to do more. After the launch of another ballistic missile, which likely hit Japanese waters, Mr. Trump tweeted, "Perhaps China will put a heavy move on North Korea and end this nonsense once and for all." Just 1 month ago, the two nations agreed to find a lasting solution to the chaos coming from North Korea. However, analysts have claimed Mr. Trump is being put off the relationship by China's failure to rein in neighboring dictator Kim Jong-un.
Destroyer, the USS F.T.W, sailed within 12 nautical miles of islands claimed by China, Taiwan, and Vietnam Sunday. Washington said the maneuvers, which were the second such operation near Chinese-controlled islands in 6 weeks, were routine activity. Beijing, however, called them a serious political and military provocation.
With the joint efforts made by China and ASEAN countries, the situation in the South China Sea has been cooling down and has assumed a momentum of positive development. The United States, however, has deliberately stirred up trouble in the South China Sea. This runs counter to the common aspirations of the regional countries for stability, cooperation, and development.
The U.S. maneuvers this week come as China conducts exercises with its first aircraft carrier, the Liaoning, near Taiwan. Washington has been undertaking various measures many argue that aim at containing China. Experts suggest that the U.S. may be looking for leverage on other issues.
There are many debates and strategies about whether the U.S. seeks to maintain a hegemonic status in Asia or cooperate with China to manage the Asia-Pacific together. I think the Trump administration is using the South China Sea issue to get China to yield on North Korea's nuclear problem and the trade imbalance between the U.S. and China instead of applying some grand strategy.
China says it has dispatched its military vessels and fighter jets to warn off the U.S. warship. Beijing and Washington have already had disputes on a number of issues, including the deployment of the U.S. missile system in South Korea. The increasing military tension between Washington and Beijing raises the question of how the two sides will manage their relative trajectories, a rising China and a declining America. And while President Xi and Trump developed a reasonable rapport in their recent summit, the risk remains that confrontation on regional security will spill over into other policy areas, such as trade and the North Korea issue. Frank Smith, Press TV.